so excited today to have Emily Taylor to help learn about or teach us about myalgic encephalomyelitis / chronic fatigue syndrome, also known as ME/CFS. So welcome, Emily. I'm so happy to have you today.
Thank you, Cheryl. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and so just to get us started, can you let us know where you live and like what is your relationship to ME/CFS?
Absolutely. So hi everyone. My name is Emily Taylor. I'm the Vice President of Advocacy and Engagement for Solve M.E or the Solve M.E CFS initiative. We are a nonprofit organization, national nonprofit, international now, dedicated to exclusively post-infection diseases, specifically ME, CFS, and long COVID, which unfortunately are very related. I'm calling in from Los Angeles, California, where I live. I am intimately familiar with this disease, both in my professional life as the VP of Advocacy and Engagement, also in my personal life, where I'm a caregiver for my mother who's had ME/CFS since 2008.
Yeah, and I think, the fact that you've taken the experience with your mother and helped turn it into so much incredible, advocacy and patient education work is really wonderful. And so, yeah, can you tell a little bit more about your mother's experience, with ME/CFS and how that led to your current work?
Absolutely. It really is one of those moments where I think the universe put me right where I was supposed to be. Back in 2008, I was working in Washington, D.C. I was on the Hill. I really enjoyed my job. And my mom went on a plane to visit her father. And on that flight, she presented with a 104-degree fever. By the time she got home, it just got worse and worse. She immediately went to bed, and that moment of going to bed ended up lasting about 4 years. For the next 4 years, my mother was pretty much bedbound due to the extended symptoms following what we believe to be a virus that prompted the initial fever. She was at her worst, unable to eat solid food. She was unable to move more than a few steps a day. Really, to the bathroom and back was as far as she was able to go. She had such sensitivity to light and sound that we ended up covering her eyes and ears and restricting anyone from going into the bedroom or even watching TV in the room adjacent because it was that sensitive with the sensory sensitivities. And just it was a constellation of symptoms that we didn't understand, and at the time, there were very few medical doctors that were willing or able to help us. Her blood panel tests came back normal, and eventually we drove several hours to an endocrinologist that was recommended to us, who sat down after 4 years of searching from doctor to doctor. So this is in 2012. Who said, and I won't tell you her name because she said what she said is, I think you have this illness that we call chronic fatigue syndrome. The good news is it probably won't kill you, and the bad news is it probably won't kill you, and there's no FDA approved treatments, there's no path that I can put you on. But what I want to do is, she said, I'm not going to put this on your chart. On your chart, I'm going to put that you have lupus, severe arthritis, Hashimoto's, Sjogren's, and like a handful of other autoimmune diseases. She said, because then we can try the treatments from those off label. And that's what we've done. And, fast forward many years later, my mother is not healthy. She's not at her pre-illness levels, but she is about 60% of where she was. So she has, for about every day, she gets out of bed now and can go work at her business and can do things. She's mostly limited to the house, but can go out probably once or twice a week. And for every day she goes out, she has a day back in bed to rest and recover from that. So we've really expanded what we kind of refer to as her energy envelope, the
Mhm.
ability to expend energy. We've managed to work through medication and a lot of trial and tribulation, and a lot of other non-medical treatments as well. to get her at this point where she is now. And I'm super grateful because that's 60% of my mom I didn't have before. So
Yeah.
it's definitely been a journey. And in that time when my mom was particularly disabled by this illness, it was a really hard time for our family. But that's how I became aware of this illness. And then flash forward another few years, I, through my network, became aware of the organization Solve M.E was interested in starting a federal affairs program. And I said, oh, I did that for autism, and I used to work on the Hill, and this is something that I would love to take my skills. And so that's what brought me to Solve M.E, and I've been here ever since. And I've managed to, as you say, uh, take my mother's experience, tell it to members of Congress and their staff, and shift the needle on this illness in a major way. And now I think we're shifting again because the comorbidity with long COVID
Yes.
and the data that shows many people with long COVID are being diagnosed with ME/CFS really indicates that we have a lot more work to do.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm applauding you for being able to tell such what I know is a long, convoluted story in such a clear way, because that's something I personally struggle with, as listeners can attest. But and the your mother's story just really it it illustrates the importance of, or the amount of tenacity it takes on the part of loved ones to not stop looking for somebody who will give you answers and take you seriously, you know? I
I
mean,
wish I could say that her experience was unique,
mm,
but statistically, it's about 4 to 6 years is the average delay for an ME/CFS patient to get diagnosed. That's kind of the
wow.
average experience. So she was actually on the short end of average with only 4 years before
Yeah.
she got her diagnosis.
Well, and as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but especially back then, I mean, a lot has changed even in the last 10, 15 years. It was thought, I mean, I remember hearing stories from people on social media that their doctors said that, oh, CFS is chronic fatigue syndrome. That's not real. That's just something that a label they're slapping on people that they don't really, it's just women that are just not trying hard enough, like all this horrible stuff, like a stigma against it. Right. And you're nodding for those
Yes,
listening.
we definitely had that experience. There was one doctor in particular early in our journey that was looking over my mother's blood test results and said, "There, I can find no reason why you should be this sick." And my mother, being the firebrand that she is, said, "Don't you tell me how sick I am. Like this is my body, and I can tell you something's not right." And so it really was. We had a lot of pushback from various medical providers. We had a lot of folks steer us towards mental health
Mm,
in various respectful and disrespectful ways.
yeah,
And that, and I have to say, like, even though at that point my mother had been essentially bedbound for 4 years, so mental health was absolutely part of the concern.
yeah.
There's no way you can go through that kind of a complete transformation of your day-to-day experience and not have mental health
Mhm.
ramifications. But it was so belittling to have them tell us, and tell my mother in particular, that her physical symptoms and her clearly dysregulated immune system were results of essentially bad mental health, and that's
Yeah,
absolutely not the case. And so we had to really, and it took and it actually it took a really great mental health professional to step in, to be a point of contact on the care team to
yeah,
say, yes, we had a really great mental health professional who actually was part of the care team and went to these doctors and said, I am, a certified, PhD, MD, and I have evaluated this woman. And yes, that is not the problem. It is, we have
yeah.
ruled that out. And that was powerful. So when folks, I guess that one takeaway I would share with your audience is, don't be afraid to have the right mental health partner as part of your team. And I emphasize the right mental health partner, not a one-way dynamic, a two-way dynamic that they truly listen and understand the physical aspects of this illness. And that is a very important piece of the medical puzzle.
Oh my gosh. I really relate. I mean, I fortunately for me only had about a year and a half period where I didn't know what was wrong with my body, but I had it was similar in the sense that I started becoming highly anxious objectively about my health, but I had no prior history of health related anxiety. I mean, I'm a 20-year-old athlete, captain of the college soccer team as a junior, like all conference selection. Like I was not anxious about my health. If anything, I probably took my body for granted, like most young kids, teenagers and stuff. And so to be told that, and the people who've listened to the story a million times, but yeah, to be told that the chicken or the egg, they're saying, well, you must be anxious and that's why your body feels like this. I was like, no, I'm anxious because my body feels like this.
Mhm.
Like my body feels like it's breaking down. Y'all are telling me I'm not sick. I know I'm sick. I just don't know what I have. And yes, of course, my blood work was also normal until they decided to run additional blood work.
Yes.
And so you're like,
Yes.
the phrase your blood work is normal means nothing unless they've run all potential blood work. And it still kind of means nothing in terms of ruling out all potential organic or, causes to this, because there's lots of things that are not measurable whatsoever by blood work. I mean, pain being one of them. So anyway, this is well, we could go on that for a super long time. So I'm sorry your
Yeah,
mom went through that.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's actually part of the work I do in my professional capacity. Is what you're talking about is very important. It's a really, really critical aspect of where research and patient experiences sort of meet in a very real way. And this is called patient-reported outcomes. So
Mhm.
what you're describing is a data classification of when a patient says they feel a certain way or the patient says they have a certain experience. And we actually, in the scientific realm, categorize those data points separately as what you would say, a blood metric or an exercise trial or, some kind of physical, tangible way to measure performance of your body. And so, for a long time, and this is actually a very real hard experience in the MECFS community, patient reported outcomes were not considered viable data. So if you had, and this is a real story, the story of the drug Ampligen, you had a drug that a big chunk of people who were tested with it responded to, and in those response rates about 40% of people said this drug makes me feel better, miraculously better, really much better. And the FDA said, okay, well, show us in what they, other data, real data. And I use the bunny quotes for people who are not able to see us, that I put finger quotes around real data, that they said this is not, show us in the numbers on a blood test or on some sort of performance metric how these patients got better. And they couldn't show in that kind of data how the patients got better, but the patients were reporting they felt better. And do you know what happened to that drug? It was not approved. Not because of safety, but because they couldn't demonstrate efficacy, quote unquote. They couldn't demonstrate the drug actually having impact, despite 40% of patients saying this drug really helps me. And so that is a very real way. And so when it manifests at the policy level with the way we deal with patient data, it manifests at the clinical level with how a doctor responds to patient data
Mhm.
in the form of, I don't feel well, and this is how I don't feel well. And it happens at the research level with how we collect data and
Yeah.
how we determine whether or not treatments are potentially working. So what you bring up is a really important point that we work on every day here at Solve ME.
It's incredible, and it completely relates to rheumatoid arthritis. There is some overlap, which we're going to discuss a little bit later. Both conditions, MECFS and rheumatoid arthritis, involve fatigue. There's a little bit of an uncertainty about the cause of the fatigue in both conditions, but the fatigue, what you're saying about PROs, patient-reported outcomes, is so critical in the fatigue element of rheumatoid arthritis, because until patients started becoming partners in research, guess what? The FDA approved medicines for rheumatoid arthritis did not even have fatigue as an outcome measure. They were
Wow.
only looking at patient reported pain and the blood work. They were not looking at patient reported fatigue. And the entire theory in the field was that both pain and fatigue were the root cause of them was that inflammation. But it turns out that the kind of inflammation we have those markers for rheumatoid arthritis tracks partly with pain and fatigue, but doesn't track perfectly. There's people whose blood work looks perfect on their when they're on their medication, and they still have persistent pain and or fatigue. So
Mhm.
it's so important. Again, I mean, it's a blessing and a curse that patients, need to be involved in advocacy and involved in research in order to get the kind of care that's going to be most helpful for us, long term. But just to backtrack 1 second before we move on to the more of the details about like we're going to talk about post-exertional malaise and the kind of fatigue that people might have who have ME/CFS. Can we can you take let me know like the Cliff Notes version of what is the definition of ME/CFS and who treats it?
Ooh, good
Sorry.
question.
Yeah.
So ME/CFS, or myalgic encephalomyelitis chronic fatigue syndrome, is a hybridized term. You can hear you it has the slash in it. And it's depending on which definition you use, it can have couple different meanings. Our organization believes that any definition of ME/CFS that's used must include the presence of post-exertional malaise, or PEM, as a symptom. And we'll talk about that later, but that is a critical high hallmark characteristic that it must be present in order for a diagnosis of ME/CFS to occur. So under the Institute of Medicine 2015 curriculum, or decision, sorry, the 2015 Institute of Medicine um, criteria
Yeah,
for
the
ME/CFS
codes.
diagnosis.
You know what the
There
codes?
are a list of symptoms which include
Mhm.
neurological symptoms. It includes musculoskeletal symptoms. It includes various other symptom trees, including neurological symptoms as well. And so it's kind of a selection list that one of these other symptoms should be present, and post-exertional malaise. And I think the key definition criteria is that these symptoms persist, cause a significant reduction in quality of life, and persist for 6 months or longer, and are most often preceded by an infection or systemic trauma. This can be surgery, this can be blood transfusions, this can be a viral or infection pathogen, a chemical exposure, mold exposure. One of these things usually precipitates, but not always. And that's
Mhm.
actually one of the really interesting things that we learned, as again, thanks to long COVID and the viral pandemic, is that there are asymptomatic viruses, something that
Yes.
we didn't fully, I think, integrate and appreciate prior to that. So that's interesting that the ratio of folks who have no obvious sign of a trigger before their ME/CFS comes on, is similar to the rate of people who have asymptomatic virus presentations.
Mm,
So we don't know for sure, but correlation does not equal causation. So I
yeah,
want to be
yeah.
very clear about this data, but it potentially could lend evidence to the fact that this is a disease that's triggered by a systemic viral or infection, that then causes something to go out of whack. And there's a lot of evidence and a lot of strong hypotheses that very much confirm that data and that line of thinking.
Yeah, and I'm gonna put in the detailed show notes on the website. There's a great, fact sheet that's a from the World ME Alliance from Solve ME, and that is really helpful for understanding ME/CFS. And it is an interesting similarity to rheumatoid arthritis. Rheumatoid arthritis is the cause is there are multiple causes that are, potentially genetic inherited predisposition, right? No environmental triggers, or there's the genetic predisposition plus an environmental trigger like a virus, or a quote unquote like a lifestyle choice like smoking. Can be there's kind of these different data points, but one of them that is can be similar with ME/CFS and RA is that having a virus. And interestingly, I always forget to tell people this, that I had this virus called the Coxsackie virus
Hmm. Hmm.
that in high school, and I didn't develop RA until 4 years later. But it's who knows, maybe that was laying dormant, and somehow my immune system suddenly was like, we are going to go on attack mode and throughout your whole body. But okay, so yeah, so it's the hallmark symptom is that PEM, post exertional malaise. Let's figure out what is that.
It is a gnarly symptom. My
Yeah.
mom refers to it as your own personal hell, because what post-exertional malaise does is if you exert yourself past the point of your body's kind of threshold, it triggers a complete relapse and shutdown. So all of your symptoms flare. Your body kind of goes into that crash that I think is a very common term that RA patients experience also. That you're the physical fatigue, the musculoskeletal fatigue, the brain fog, all the symptoms get worse and exacerbated, and it's all built into this kind of time period of between 24 and 48 hours after some kind of exertion. So when folks describe that pushed crash experience, that is often what we would call post-exertional malaise. And the
Mhm.
word malaise is really unfortunate. There's another way to describe that's post-exertional neurological exacerbation, PENE.
Mm.
So there's a couple ways to describe the symptom, but really it's that experience of having a good day, going out and enjoying that good day, doing whatever it is that you're passionate about doing, and as my mom would say, and then you're punished for it.
Yeah. It's
Between
almost
48 hours later, yes.
Yeah, from like a behavioral perspective, it's so tragic. It's reminds me of I have a cousin who has narcolepsy, and one of his triggers is laughter. So when
Oh,
he laughs, he sometimes suddenly narcolepsy is where you suddenly fall asleep. And so he has this negative reinforcement where with joy, then this
mhm.
terrible thing happens where if he's in the middle of this, a concert or something and he laughs, he could fall asleep. Same way with you're like, wow, I'm feeling great. I'm at my friend's wedding, and then you 24 to 48 hours within 24 to 48 hours you suddenly feel so much worse. Your brain is at some point going to associate exertion with um feeling bad,
Exactly,
and
yeah.
it's yeah, and it's not it's this is where it can get a little tricky. If and I know the primary audience of people listening to this have in some sort of inflammatory or autoimmune kind of arthritis, like rheumatoid, psoriatic, ankylosing spondylitis, or lupus. Some of you will also have a separate diagnosis of ME, CFS, and that just like Emily said, the hallmark symptom of that is that post-exertional malaise. The average patient, from the research I have been able to look at, from the occupational therapist lens and also from my own patient lens and experience, is that the typical patient with RA feels better when they exercise, fatigue wise, sleep wise, mood wise. However, I would say this is where the devil's always in the details that you do have to exercise with it, or I'm not, so exercise isn't the same as exertion, but it involves exertion.
Yes.
But you can exert yourself in many ways that you wouldn't necessarily think of as exercise, right? Like just going places, doing stuff, going to the grocery store.
Mhm.
But the average person with RA is going to have a threshold after which they will feel like I'll just say myself, I will feel worse when I push myself far outside of my normal just right challenge. In OT we call it the just right challenge. So if I ride my exercise bike 20 to 30 minutes, and then I've done weightlifting anywhere between 20 and minutes to an hour with little rest in between. If I suddenly try to ride my bike for 3 hours, 4 hours, I'm going to feel really bad, you know, but I'm not feeling bad if on a daily basis, when I exert myself a little bit beyond my normal threshold. That sounds like with ME, CFS, you're really feeling that consistently worse after the
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and what you're describing is actually, what we call pacing.
yeah.
And pacing is, a critical healthcare and, like, lifestyle salvation of so
Yeah.
many people with ME/CFS. Pacing is essentially, exactly as you described, learning where your boundaries are, and they are highly individual, highly specific for each person. So your 20 minutes of exercise bike might be somebody else's getting up and go to the bathroom, might be somebody else's 3 hours of exercise bike, right? So it's so specific for what you and yourself are experiencing. For my mother, when we were very first beginning to kind of on her medical journey, that pacing involved a walk to the kitchen and back. And that was kind of as far as we started. And then it was like maybe to the living room and back. And then maybe, okay, we can get to the car and back just to like practice maybe a potential drive. And then, the energy that a drive takes and just even sitting upright and how difficult that is. So it all plays together. So pacing, and there's some really great, I'll add them into the chat, some really great pacing guides from our friends at M.E Action, who have an excellent one pager that describes what and how to pace. But it's about the ultimate goal of pacing, and the ultimate end result that you're looking for when you pace is avoiding post-exertional malaise, so preventing the crash cycle while gradually elongating that energy envelope, around gradually increasing the amount that you can be okay for. But again, without triggering post-exertional malaise, because if you trigger that crash episode, that post-exertional malaise, you potentially set yourself back all the way to the beginning.
Yeah.
And you can actually make yourself worse long term if you trigger PEM too frequently and too often. So
Yeah.
sometimes, and I think this is the difficult reality of living with these illnesses, you have to trigger post-exertional malaise. Like, for example, you mentioned like a friend's wedding.
Yeah.
That was actually one of the most challenging points was when my brother got married, and we were trying to get my mother to the ceremony, and it was incredibly difficult because she was having a bad day that day. And we had traveled, we actually specifically traveled the day before to give her extra time to rest so that we would be potentially ready for the wedding, but we did not plan it out well enough, and we did not have enough rest time, and so we were a bit late to the ceremony. And that made some people angry and hurt some feelings, and but that was the reality, is that without you build into your planning triggering post-exertional malaise because you want to be present at an event like that. So that's one part of pacing, is is managing if you're going to try and go beyond your limits. You're going to do something like for a wedding or for something special that you want to be present for, giving a week afterwards to recover, making sure you travel ahead of time to recover from the travel. All of that is sort of built into that lifestyle management of acknowledging the physical limitations of your own body. And in this case, it was my mother's body that was really struggling to keep up. The good news is, and the beautiful part of that story is we did get there in time for pictures, and we did have some beautiful moments. And we made it work by good communication, and folks having enough compassion to understand that my mom was managing her chronic illness. But not everybody gets that, and we still to this day have some little touch points where it's like, well, at least you're not late, and it's like, okay, that was really not necessary.
Uh,
But that's sort of the reality that folks deal with, and that's just one example of a wedding. And then multiply that times everything you do: taking a shower, making yourself a meal, spending time with your loved ones. It's a constant negotiation, and it is emotionally exhausting for the people who have to constantly make that decision. And it's emotionally exhausting for the people who are trying to assist with making those decisions and try to be support, is that you never know where you're going to be, because these illnesses are so transient. And it just, I'd say, a take home for your readers or your listeners: you never know anybody else's journey, right? You never know where someone else is
yeah.
at, and if they're having a good day or bad day. And I think we in the chronic illness community have collectively learned to give ourselves that grace, and then by extension give others that grace. But there are many, many folks in the rest of the community that are a bit ableist and don't see those invisible disabilities.
Mhm.
And so I think we can all be better about communicating. And even when you tell your story about an RA, you're helping somebody with ME/CFS, because you're making that impact of, are we all giving each other grace for those who have invisible illnesses or invisible disabilities?
100%. And I think, you know, the phrase came up to mind as you were talking, like, listen to your body is such it's such an incomplete thing. Like, we're told so often, listen to your body, right? But with things like post-exertional malaise, where your body in the moment is, or even let's say dietary triggers for some people would also be, dietary triggers are often delayed. For me, being in the sun or being hot are huge fatigue triggers. And I feel them pretty quickly, but it's way worse like 5 to 8 hours afterwards. So if you're just listening to your body in the moment, your body, if you might have endorphins, you might just not be physiologically experiencing the repercussions of your actions yet. We don't even have the luxury to just listen to our body. We have to always account for, what is my body feeling right now? But what do I also know from my past patterns? It's so complex. It's
Absolutely. It's why I'm a huge proponent of medical journaling. That was the single thing that helped our family so much was, especially when it came to food sensitivity, because as you say, it's a few hours later or even a day later. And
Mhm.
so we would write down everything that mom ate, everything that she took, all of her medications, and then we'd start finding those patterns. And so medical journaling, even if you don't share it with your doctor, but I highly encourage folks to medical journal with the intention of sharing it with your doctor, because it really is one of the most helpful tools that my family found for identifying those patterns and trends. And that was critical in our world of pacing for my mother's
yeah.
illness.
And I think something I learned about myself is that I'm I tend to be a problem solver. And so I'm seeking like what is the ultimate plan? What is my ultimate RA plan? And I think when I first got diagnosed, and this would relate to ME/CFS too, it's like with any chronic illness, you're thinking, okay, well, just tell me what the plan is, or I'll figure it out, I'll do my tracking. And I think at some point for me, it was so helpful to say, on the one hand, I'm going to put a lot of time and energy into discovering my body's patterns, learning about this condition, connecting to others, figuring, quote unquote, figuring it out. And I'm
Mhm.
also going to, thankfully for therapy, that I finally, for a long time, I didn't go to therapy because of that experience of being told I was not sick, just anxious. And I was like, I'm not going to go to therapy because that means you guys were right, that it was, that my anxiety was causing all this. But anyway, so I finally went to therapy and realize that it's so beneficial to also build up coping skills for when you're like, you know what? I tracked this, and 99 times out of 100, this, and when I did A, it resulted in B. But today I did A and it resulted in X. Like, I feel worse now. And I did the thing
Mhm.
that 5 days in a row, I did my 20-minute exercise bike 5 days in a row. Felt great, felt great, felt great. Same human, apparently I'm still me, and some days I'll do that 20 minutes and mysteriously I will not feel good anymore. For a long time I kept trying to quote unquote figure it out, and finally I was like, okay, it's helpful to do that, but it's also helpful to say, sometimes it's just random, or sometimes I won't know, and that's okay. And being like you mentioned, that grace and compassion for yourself too can be so helpful. And the grace and compassion from the people around you. And that's, we kind of have to educate them, and say, look, a lot of people tell me, well, how do I get them to understand? Like, how do I get the people in my life to understand what I'm going through? And, on the one hand, you can't make someone understand something that they're determined not to understand.
Mhm.
Sadly, any of us who've had children know that. No, I'm just kidding. But like trying to tell a toddler, no, you can't have that. Why not go to the toy store with a toddler? You're like, they don't want to understand that. No, but that also, it's okay to say that some people won't, they don't get it till they get it. Like, some people will
Mhm.
come back into your life later after they've experienced something like long COVID, or like a friend or loved one or themselves having ME/CFS, and then they'll be like, okay, I get it now. So but yeah, thank you. You've put in here the pacing and management guide, which 100%, like in my occupational therapy program, not surprisingly, we didn't learn anything that I remember about ME/CFS. We did learn about conditions that cause fatigue, like that are more well known, like
Mhm.
multiple sclerosis. And I was taught in my master's of OT program about, activity pacing and energy conservation. And so these are very well known techniques in terms of like the research, but not all patients are taught them. You're not all given help from a physical therapist, occupational therapist, and similarly, not unfortunately, there's I know with ME/CFS, there's a little bit of a history of the well-intentioned, physical therapists and OTs not knowing about post-exertional malaise, and then being like, we just need to just keep pushing yourself and keep exercising and you're like, I'm feeling worse. Like,
Well, yeah,
so, you know.
and a lot of that is driven by our payment structure. So this is
Oh,
another moment where,
yes.
policy and
100%.
clinical care kind of crash into each other. Is that our insurance payers and our policies are designed like you're supposed to always see improvement, right? So if you're not showing improvement, we're not going to pay you, even though in many cases, and any physical therapist will tell you, sometimes maintenance is the goal, sometimes prevention is the goal.
Yeah.
So, that endless push to like, okay, we want to see your outcomes recover. Sometimes, that not seeing change, like balance, maintaining an even keel is a positive result of pacing. If you're not triggering post-exertional malaise and things are evening out and you're not having crashes, that's good. You may not be
Mhm.
exerting yourself more, but you're managing. And so I think that's something to keep in mind, is that a lot of these systems are sort of driving towards predetermined outcomes that are not necessarily reflective of the reality of these less understood illnesses. RA, for example, ME/CFS is another big example,
Mm,
long COVID, which we're still learning about, another big example, kind of a constellation of other illnesses. So all
mhm.
of these things are just kind of critical in saying, again, listen to your body, and sometimes you have to be your own advocate to know, and your body's advocate to know when you're hit your limits, and you got to listen to that. And Especially, you kind of mentioned exercise earlier. I just wanted to kind of circle back to that point.
Yeah.
No, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because exercise for many illnesses, for POTS as well, is something that can improve long-term outcomes. But for ME/CFS, and especially for people with post-exertional malaise, the opposite is true. So it does create this sort of cognitive dissonance where it's like, okay, you have POTS, you should exercise. Okay, you have RA, you should exercise. Oh, but you also have ME/CFS. Maybe that's going to be harmful. So I would advise everyone who's listening, if you think that ME/CFS might be you, if you think you're having that push crash cycle and that post exertional malaise symptom, talk to your doctor and be very cautious about pursuing exercise as a potential treatment, because it can, for people with ME/CFS, cause long term harm and actually set you back, and you'll
Yeah.
lose functionality over the long term.
Yes, and I think, it if you have rheumatoid arthritis, you're going to be seen by a rheumatologist. Just out of curiosity, for someone listening who maybe is undiagnosed or only has a primary care, is there, I honestly don't know this, so I'm asking you, is there a medical professional that's like the bread and butter one that would like diagnose ME/CFS, or is it very, what's the word? Is it dependent on the professional's own expertise and experience?
It is very dependent on the
Okay.
professional's expertise. There's no specific specialty that owns ME/CFS per se.
Okay.
It's also very multi-systemic, so it falls in a lot of areas. We know the immune system's involved, so your endocrinologists and your immunologists kind are that's where we found help with a particular doctor. Definitely neurologists, there's neurological symptoms, and neurologists often get involved. Infectious disease specialists, because there's an infectious disease component. All sorts of different doctors can be specialists in this area, and it's sort of. I emphasize this a lot with the folks that I talk to and work with, that it's about the partnership you create with that doctor. And so I
Yeah.
think any doctor can be the right fit. It doesn't, and there's no particular specialty that I would say go to this one. I would
Mm,
say it's about the specialist you find there, and about their willingness and ability to listen to their patients, to take those patient reported outcomes and take them into into a meaningful discourse. Partner with their patients. It's a collaborative two-way relationship. It's not one way, and I think that power structure needs to be balanced, and
mhm.
that's a critical part. And three, someone who might be willing to learn, someone who's got an open mind. I think one of the statistics, this may be outdated now, but back in 2015, only 30% of medical textbooks even mentioned ME/CFS. So that means
Wow.
the rest
Yeah.
of the doctors who were not getting those textbooks had no idea what they were dealing with. So it might be truly an information gap. And if they're willing to admit they don't know what's going on and
Yeah.
learn something, that's a critical characteristics of a good doctor in this space, of a good partner in this space. Someone who may admit, I don't have all the answers and I'm willing to learn from someone who might have them. And I'll also say that there's a couple ME/CFS specialists who are willing to do teleconsults.
Mhm.
with other doctors. And so there's a list on the Solve ME website. So that's again, not every doctor offers that, not every specialist offers that, but some of them do. And that can be a really good method to getting the information to your doctor. There's also, as you mentioned, the World ME Guide, World ME Alliance Guide. There's a lot of great medical publications, but I'll just do a shameless plug for our friends at the Bateman Horn Center who have some of the best medical education in this area. They have continuing medical education programs, including some echo style programs that are just absolutely amazing. So if you are looking for resources for your doctor specifically, and your doctor is willing to learn, the Bateman Horn Center is a great resource there for medical information about this illness.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And that part about partnering with your provider is 100% identical in rheumatology as well. If you have rheumatoid arthritis or psoriatic, it really, and this is best practices recommended by every professional association, European League Against Rheumatism, American College of Rheumatology. It's a partnership between the patient and provider, but a lot of providers or doctors are in kind of an old, some of them are just in an outdated, that's not how they were trained. So,
Mhm.
keeping, unfortunately, there is also a rheumatologist shortage. So sometimes you don't have a huge amount of choice, but within the choices you have, finding somebody who will partner with you, take the time to explain things to you, and look at your unique patterns, whether or not they're typical or not. And I was going to say that just so I'm really clear to people listening, if you only have rheumatoid arthritis, exercise is actually the most recommended integrative health treatment according to there's 2022 guidelines from the American College of Rheumatology, guidelines for exercise, rehabilitation, diet, and additional integrative interventions. Consistent engagement exercise is the only one that was highly recommended, recommended above any specific diet, above any specific alternative complementary thing like acupuncture, massage, even thermal modalities, which people put out like heat pads, cooling pads. So even more than comprehensive occupational therapy. So I'm trying to be objective here, even more than my own profession. So if that is your only diagnosis, exercise, even if it's high intensity, is not likely to cause the kinds of post-exertional malaise that you're seeing with ME/CFS. But if you're starting an exercise plan and you're starting really, and you're feeling fatigued, something that I would do is scale it back first. Maybe you jumped in too fast. Maybe you just like I said, like myself, if I push it way beyond my boundary, I will get really fatigued. And so start really slow. And if you don't experience that stair step improvement pretty rapidly with increasing your activity levels, it's like 15 minutes, 20, 25, you're really consistently feeling fatigued, then might be a sign that you could go ask. I would almost wonder if you could ask your own rheumatologist, do you have experience diagnosing ME/CFS or evaluating for it? And if not, who do you recommend? Because it is kind of a small world in some
It
of these.
is.
Yeah. And rheumatologists I think are known a little bit as being pretty cerebral and pretty much, used to gray areas. They're not as much like, I don't know, I don't want to make like too many, there's definitely stereotypes of different doctors that are, based on some realities. They're like, if I cannot see it while putting a scope in your esophagus, it is not real. So rheumatologists are pretty good at these gray areas, but they may not have a lot of experience in ME/CFS. So I know that's going to be something that if people listening, some of them are going to want to pursue, because to a hammer, everything is a nail. If you're having
Mhm.
fatigue and you have rheumatoid arthritis, it's easy for providers to just say, oh, well, it's just from your arthritis. But just the rheumatoid arthritis wouldn't cause this really consistent post-exertional malaise, the severe fatigue typically that you would see in ME/CFS. So that's what we're trying to kind of disentangle a little bit today. But
Absolutely. And I think that's important to note. We talked about during our presentation at the autoimmune conference the types of fatigue.
oh
And there
yes.
are definitely fatigue is an umbrella term. There's a lot of
Mhm.
different flavors, I think. And anybody who's experienced a chronic illness, especially a complex chronic illness like rheumatoid arthritis or ME/CFS, you know those flavors of fatigue
Right.
intimately well. But for those who may not be familiar, post-exertional malaise is one type of fatigue. You may also get musculoskeletal fatigue, where your physical limbs feel heavy or leaden and you can't move them. You may get cognitive fatigue with brain fog, or fibro fog, as some folks call it, where you just kind of feel like your brain is literally floating in a cloud outside your head and you can't get it to like work with you today. We've had those experiences. And then there's also, the pervasive fatigue of like, I feel like I ran a marathon and my body is like, can't keep up. So it really helps. And this is something this is another kind of tips and tricks for the medical field. To when you're describing your fatigue, be very specific about what you're experiencing and try to use a tangible example. And let me be specific on what I mean by that. So instead of saying, I feel tired all the time, right? Oh wow. Well, okay, what type of fatigue, how often, and how severe? Those are the three categories I want you to think about when you think about your symptoms. So if you're experiencing, oh, I'm tired all the time. Oh, actually, now that I think about it, it's my body is tired. It's my limbs. Like I feel like I'm having that musculoskeletal fatigue. I can't move my arm very well. Oh, and how often does it happen? Oh, that happens 3 to 5 times a week. I'm experiencing that fatigue, or every day, 3 to 5 times a day, or 3 to 5 times an hour. Be specific about how frequently it's happening and how severe it is. Give an example. So my arm fatigue is so bad I can't lift a cup of water, or it's
Yeah.
so bad I can't lift a load of laundry, or it's so bad that I can't lift it off the bed. Those are three very different symptoms, and the doctor needs to hear exactly where you're coming from about your specific symptoms. So especially when it comes to fatigue, because fatigue is such a nuanced symptom, help your doctor out by giving them how frequently it happens, how severe it is, with an actual example of like, this is what I'm experiencing, and what kind of fatigue it is, or what kind of pain it is, or to give them the flavor of that particular
Yeah.
symptom, and that will go a long way to helping your doctor understand what your day-to-day experience is.
That is 100%. 'Cause yeah, that is so true. Actually, I give people that, or I recommend doing that for pain as well, because pain for rheumatoid arthritis, it's not just one thing, right? I might be on the scale of, stiffness. I might be at a 4 for stiffness, a 0 for sharp stabbing pain, a maybe 2 for hot pain. Like I might have my joints are tender, swollen, hot, but not stabbing, and they're similar, they're also stiff, but having just one number that doesn't have any context to it is not helpful. And I mean, this is like music to my ears as an occupational therapist, is linking it to your functional activity. And that not only it paints a picture to your doctor, and it also is something they can document, because you're saying, are they having a functional limitation? Like the whole point of occupational therapy is helping people with illness, injury, or disability be able to function in their daily activities. If the person can't function, we should be able to see them under our scope of practice. Whether or not insurance decides to reimburse for that is their own drama, around them trying to make money and not wanting to pay for anything. So anyway, sorry if you're an insurance company, but tell me if I'm wrong.
In
Happy.
my experience, you are not wrong.
Yeah. So, it's like they, I've seen a lot of, just in the 3 years of running the Room to Thrive support group that I'm doing for people with rheumatic disease, rheum being short for rheumatic, or like rheumatoid arthritis or psoriatic arthritis. So many people, they've said, I've told my doctor, I tell them or consider, I'm not giving you medical advice, but consider telling them, what can you not do specifically? My hands are so stiff, I can't turn the pages in my child's book or my grandchild's book to read them a board book, not even like a difficult to turn page, right? Or it's so stiff, I can't hold the pot to, or I have so much fatigue, like you mentioned earlier, I can't get from the bed to the bathroom. I have to put a bedside commode next to my bed because I can't take those 15 steps, you know, and, um, and again, tragically, if you are bedbound, you will typically qualify for home health occupational therapy for at least a short while. But, we would literally come to people's houses. I mean, I just saw this happen actually with my mom. This is more of an acute rehabilitation. She had her hip replaced, but they're talking literal number of steps. How many steps are from the upstairs to downstairs? How many steps does she have to walk to the bathroom? Is there a turn here or there? Does she turn left or right? These are those tedious things that we actually measure as a health profession. So you don't have to go through all of it on your own, although you typically will end up having to go through some of it on your own, sadly. It's good news, bad news.
And that's the part where I think advocacy comes in, is to ensure that those experienced people who do have to go through it on their own have the supports and safety net that they need and deserve to be
Mhm.
able to survive and be part of our society. And I think that's again one of those examples of where the reality of your patient experience hits sort of the meta policy world,
Yeah.
because those are the decisions that we collectively make as a society. Where do we put our resources? Who are we helping? And and if you're not telling your story, if we're not seeing that experience, then no one's going to help it because it's not in the public discourse. So I think again, just advocacy, public awareness, sharing your truth is so critical in changing the overall way that we collectively handle these illnesses. And those are at the big level with policy, at the little level with doctors, and at the individual level with your day to day.
Oh my gosh. So beautifully said. And I'll put some links to for people who have arthritis, specifically to some organizations that provide kind of annual or frequently throughout the year advocacy opportunities. And just in case you're like me, at first I was kind of, unlike you, I was not comfortable with federal or legislative policy at first, or state level policy. I was scared because I was like, I don't understand how the government really works. I don't know, like, what's the legislative versus a judicial? Like, I remember learning this in high school, but am I going to look stupid if I go up there? And I'm usually not shy. I usually am not shy to tell my story anywhere. But the first time I did share it with a legislative representative, or a state senator, or state representative to the federal, government, I was kind of like, I was nervous. But what I didn't know before doing it is that these organizations, whether it's Solve M.E, Autoimmune Association, Arthritis Foundation, like I've gone to Washington, D.C. with the American College of Rheumatology, my state capital with the Arthritis Foundation, they prep you, they give you the bullet points, and they do the heavy work for you of understanding, okay, this senator is related to arthritis in this way. Like turns out my representative to or my state representative her mom has rheumatoid arthritis. So it's like immediately I know that I'm talking to somebody who understands this a little bit more than the average person, right? And then they give you your talking points, and like you said, what you need to provide is your own story to humanize these issues, because these legislators are, advocacy people, they get lobbyists, everyone's just like talking to them with these statistics all day. And with what all you need to do is come in and be like, this happened to me, it hurt me because of this, or it helped me because of this. And it's really gratifying, because when you've been so beat down, year after year, by feeling like, wow, I'm like at the mercy, my healthcare decisions are being made by people, the insurance company employees who don't even have any healthcare training, like it's a really demoralizing experience. Then you can feel, at least I'm doing something to help. Sorry, preaching to the choir.
It helps so much. I cannot tell you how much it is. It is I often use this analogy of a car when we're talking about
Okay.
of advocacy. And you have the person who's driving the car, you have the navigator, you've got everyone in the car who's kind of collectively traveling on this journey of progress or systems change together. But what your stories are, what your advocacy is, what your volunteer hours are, is the gasoline that makes that car go. Without any of that, the car is not going anywhere. And truly, so it is your experience, is your lived experience. You are an expert in your own experience that makes the advocacy possible. Because without your storytelling, without that awareness generating, the car of advocacy does not drive. So you are the gas that powers this important car, and don't be afraid to share your stories. Please get involved. I'll definitely share some links as well. But couldn't agree more. You said it so well, Cheryl, that is the one of the most powerful things you as a patient can do.
Well, I mean, thank you so much. It's been really wonderful talking to you. It went by really, really fast. If you have an extra minute, I always like to ask, what is what advice would you have for somebody newly diagnosed? I mean, listen to this whole thing because it's chock full of helpful information, but is there anything that you like to tell newly diagnosed people?
Oh, wow. There's a lot of things I would tell,
Yeah.
but I'd say if I had to distill it into just one, identify, find, and use your support networks. And you have more than you realize. Think about everyone in the community that has your illness, peer-to-peer networks, folks like Cheryl, folks like me. I mean, we are part of your support network at a big level and at a small level. So I'd say find, utilize your support networks, and they can be as big as an entire organization. They can be as small as your sister, brother, mother, friend, partner. But don't be afraid to use them, because I think the folks that I see overall who manage these illnesses and are happy and successful in life despite this chronic illness are the ones that are willing and able to ask for help. And I think there's a lot of support out there. Even if you're feeling isolated and alone, there's a lot of people who care about you and are there with you and done this journey, and they are gold mines of information. So I'd say
Mhm.
I could say 100 other things too, but I think all roads lead to finding that support network and engaging in that support network, and remembering and utilizing it whenever you're down, because there's a lot of folks out there like me who are fighting for these illnesses every day and have really great resources to share.
I love it. That applies really to so many conditions. I think it's beautifully said. Where can people find you or your organization online?
Oh, well, we are Solve ME, so you can find us at solveme.org. We're Please Solve CFS on X or Twitter. We are Please Solve CFS on Twitter. We're also on Instagram. We're on
Okay.
LinkedIn. We're on Facebook. That's all of those communities are available and open. So there's lots of different ways to find us. I'd be happy to share all that information. That's our organization. I'd also mention, I mentioned ME Action, another great organization with pacing and management guides. I mentioned Bateman Horn Center, another great organization. For those of you with long COVID, the COVID-19 Long Hauler Advocacy Project is
Mhm.
stellar. Even if you had RA and then got COVID and got new symptoms, that's still,
Mhm.
or even exacerbated your old symptoms, that qualifies as long COVID. So if you're one of those folks,
Right.
the COVID-19 Long Hauler Advocacy Project is doing stellar work. And I could go on, but those are the kind
No.
of the I'll
It's
stop there
great.
because I know we're out of time.
No, it's great. And it is part of, you mentioned the support network is I'm always, I'm older. I was diagnosed in 2003, and I'm always, it just blows my mind when someone, will send me a DM or private message on Instagram being like, I just got diagnosed like an hour ago. Like, and I found you. And I'm like, whoa, like it's amazing that you can find. I mean, it's a blessing and a curse, social media, but we both know this. But the fact that you can immediately reach out and you can start building that network the day you get
Mhm.
diagnosed is just really exciting to me. So yeah.
The internet is a powerful tool and has brought so many people together, and
Yeah.
things like this that we can, get information out there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Everyone check out definitely the show notes to be sure to there's going to be tons of links in the show notes today. And just Emily, thank you again for your time and your advocacy. I just can't wait to see what keeps coming out of, Solve ME. You are doing amazing work. So thank you again.
Thank you, Cheryl, and it's a pleasure working with you. And if there's any way that we can help in your advocacy work or your
Oh,
continued, please, we love to partner. Don't hesitate to reach out.
awesome. Thank you so much. Bye bye for
Take care.
now.